Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Tales from the Fireplace, Chapter 2. How are we? Are we well on this wonderful night? We have had a few technical heartbreaks this afternoon, so hopefully this will run without a hitch, without any crazed hiccups or minor explosions. Allow me to just press a few buttons over here. I feel like I'm flying some kind of ancient aircraft at times. There we go, lovely. Nice bit of background music there. I have such a variety of gadgetries in front of me to ensure that this is as entertaining and as magnificent and as technologically advanced as my increasing years allow me to. There we go. Now, can you all see me? I turn my attention to Mrs. Deathley, looking for a hands up. Is everything looking okay? We're looking good. In case you're wondering where Mrs. Deathley is tonight, she's over here. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Very good.
I'm doing that thing again where I've got past you in my ear.
Oh, yes.
And present you over there.
Of course, because
so
the way these things work, as I speak, there is then a delay of around some seconds.
I feel a little bit unhinged.
You're a bit slightly drunk, because you're probably hearing me talk now, then also hearing me talk again in about 12 seconds'
I can
time.
hear myself now as well.
Oh,
that's even weirder.
Disorientating, but you're holding it well.
Thank
Marvellous. Shout out for Rebecca Harris and her mum. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you posted it twice. So I did it the first time, and then you posted it again in excitement. I am in the fireplace. This is my fireplace. I am in a disused, old, terrifying fireplace, low down in the office. Let's just get rid of Mrs. Death. She doesn't want to be on camera all night long. Thank you, Richard. This waistcoat was found in a small, wet Waitrose bag around the back of some dubious bike sheds. I won't go into any more information. So, without further ado, let me just shuffle my running order across. A quick overlay of what we will be doing this evening. I have shuffled things up ever so slightly from Chapter 1, taking on board some feedback. Of course, as we know, the imagery that we had last week, the 2 weeks ago, how time flies. As the imagery, the haunted images were such a huge success. They were very popular with everybody. We've added a few more of those tonight, including some images from you, wonderful people. A few people have sent me photographs that they have captured over the last few years, decades in fact, and have sent them over with a small bit of story. Sharon, that is Marmite in the background, and I love it. You may hate it, I love it, and that's what makes humans wonderfully interesting, how we can both love and hate something in equal measure. I could literally pour Marmite directly into my mouth for hours with no regrets. We will also be listening to interviews from 2 people. I've decided to drop the interviews from 3 to 2. And we are joined tonight by some wonderful people, Kirsty, Ela McIntyre, and Chris Mundy, who will be sharing their stories with us later on tonight. We will be talking about a haunted item, a terrifying haunted object that some of you may have heard of, because this little chap actually became quite prominent in modern culture recently, in popular culture. He's had an entire film made about him, in fact. We'll be visiting that chap a little bit later on. And then we will be, of course, having the reading tonight of H.G. Wells' The Red Room before the end is through. Now, I'm going to level with you. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to go. Normally, I read through these stories 2 or 3 times before I read them out live into the internet in front of loads of people. I have not quite had the opportunity to do that this week. I have read through it once. I've highlighted the bits, the color-coded the stuff, so I kind of know what intonations and emotions to put on certain bits. But apart from that, I've not really read it more than kind of fleetingly. So let's find out what happens. And then, of course, we will be pulling apart and analysing a few things this evening, particularly the haunted images and, of course, those interviews there. Now, without further waffle, I think we should get started. And we're going to begin tonight with 5 haunted images. Now, I do warn you, as always, some of these can be quite distressing. Some of them can be a little bit unnerving. I've started us off, I think, relatively light for image round number 1, because, let me tell you, the ones in number 3, not good. Not pleasant. I managed to track down a set of images that I found. I should say I found. I was introduced to late last year, and I had struggled to find them on the internet. And I managed to find all 3 of them. They are a sequence of images that, I'm not going to lie, they get progressively worse. That'll be in the final set of images tonight. Okay, so without further ado, my friends, we're going to talk about haunted image number 1, which also has a 1A attached to it. How official is that? And here we go. So do feel free to let me know if everything sounds okay. If the music is too loud and distracting, again, please do let me know. I am a one-man band here. Mrs. Deathley is monitoring the situation. But she's wiggling her earphones at me. I'm not sure what that's meant to communicate. I'm assuming it means something. But off we go. The Marmite chat has exploded within the comments, but we'll leave it for now. So this first image that we're looking at here, this was an image taken in 1936, and it has gained the nickname The Brown Lady of Rainham Hall, because the photograph was taken in Rainham Hall, and indeed, well, it's an odd one, because the photo is black and white, kind of a tinge of sepia. The Brown Lady, we'll get to the nickname of that in a little while. And the story goes that in 1936, 2 men from Country Life magazine were standing at the bottom of a staircase in Rainham Hall, Norfolk, England. The photographer and his assistant had been about to take a photograph of the main staircase when suddenly the gentleman operating the buttons on the photographic device saw a vapory form, gradually assuming the appearance of a woman heading down the stairs towards them. Seconds later, the photograph had been hastily captured. The image was published in Country Life and dubbed by the editor The Brown Lady. Well, there you go. Now, some believe it was actually the figure of Lady Dorothy Townsend, who was said to have haunted the hall since her mysterious and peculiar death in 1726. Investigators were of the opinion that the photographic evidence was untampered, with one gentleman saying, "I will say at once I was impressed. I was told a perfectly simple story. They saw the apparition descending the stairs. There was a shout. The flashbulb fired, with the results which we now see. I could not shake their story, as I had no right to disbelieve them. The negative is entirely innocent of any faking." However, in 1937, the Paranormal Society of Physical Research concluded that it was simply because the camera had shaken during a 6-second exposure. Someone may have run down the stairs. The whole thing may well have been absolute banoffee. But it has become one of the most famous haunted images to ever have existed. Now, we're going to jump ahead ever so slightly now from 1936 to 2000s. It's just simply the 2000s. I don't have an exact date for this one. And this is a photograph called The Grey Lady of Hampton Court. Now, the information that sits along this photograph says that today's digital cameras are just as likely to create a fake haunting. The Grey Lady, which you can hopefully see just there, looming over a visitor, is almost certainly a quirk of technology in modern phone cameras. You see, unlike analog film that was used for the photograph of the Brown Lady of Rainham Hall, phone cameras tend to take photographs in stages in the same way that a scanner moves over a piece of paper. It's a slower process, especially in darker places where the camera's phone sensors need more time to record enough picture information. Now, what it can do, it can stitch images together. It can cause images to be stretched and distended. Hopefully, what we're seeing here is someone quite tall, moving swiftly, causing that stretch and separation. But a lot of people have said it does actually defy explanation. They look at that and they can't quite wrap their heads around how things go. I'm going to move on now to image number 2, because that was 1 and 1A, and this is a image that was sent in by a listener. This was actually sent in by Robin Denise Casmara, and it was taken in Monet's garden in France. And she writes, "I took this in France while at Monet's garden. I know I waited for people to pass by before taking the photo. I didn't see this man in it until I got home a couple of weeks after it was taken. It was also taken in July, much too hot for the sort of outfit the person is wearing. They don't even look like they're waking by, just standing there." So if you can see on that image, I think what Robin has done there is use one of those devices that takes certain colours out of the imagery, just leaving the red to stand. But I just cropped in a little bit closer. You can see perhaps the image that she was talking about. just there, in the lower right of the image, you can see a couple of the statues to the lower left. There appears to be a gentleman wearing a dark coat and a dark hat, just standing there in the bottom right of the photograph. Thank you for sending that in, Robin. Much appreciated. Don't forget, if you do have any haunted images yourself, anything you've captured over the years, please do feel free to send them our way. Jumping back in time now, all the way to 1891. This photograph was taken by Sybil Corbett in the library of Combermere Abbey, Cheshire. You can see there, sat in the chair in the foreground, is a faint outline of a man's head, a collar and a right arm. It is said to be the ghost of Lord Combermere himself, who had recently died in a riding accident, and who was actually being buried at the time the photograph was taken. Now, the photographic exposure itself took an hour. Very, very early photography at work here, leading many skeptics to suggest that perhaps a servant had entered the room, briefly sat in the chair. However, most household staff claimed that every single person, except for the photographer who was documenting the space, was at Combermere's funeral at the time. It would have been unheard of for someone to just walk in and sit down in the gentleman's study. Decide for yourselves. Moving along. It's another photograph sent in. This one by A.D. Tuplin. Now, this one took me a little while to see. This photograph was taken at RAF Wigsley, which is the Royal Air Force Station, about 7 miles west of Lincoln. It's now used mostly for farmland. And during the Second World War, it was used by several squadrons. The main watchtower still mostly stands but in serious disrepair. The photograph was taken by A.D. Tuplin, who said, and I quote, "I took this at RAF Wigsley Control Tower. I know breath can cause a smoke effect, but you'll see there is a strange face. A very spooky place indeed." Now, if you see in the middle of the image, there is a white rectangular square. And there you can almost make out the outline of the dark recess of an eye and the lower jaw. Again, make up your own mind. And finally, for this section at least, I told you I was going to start you off fairly easily before breaking into the properly horrific stuff a little bit later on. We have this image here taken over 100 years ago in Ireland, simply entitled The Extra Hand. A ghostly object concealed in this spooky Irish snap will give you a fright. Taken more than 100 years ago, experts tried to explain the hand as perhaps a trick of light or a ruffle in a shirt, but neither idea truly works out. You can just see there, someone handily encircled it with the red. There's a lot of photos out here like this. Photos where you see perhaps something additional in the photograph, something that really shouldn't quite be there, something that doesn't really make sense. A lot of these have started appearing on the internet most recently. A lot of images of extra legs, arms that can't quite be where they are, almost as if people have kind of piled in like a heap of contortionists. It doesn't really make sense. The line of the bodies isn't really sort of making any kind of decent sense. Well, there you go. Let's turn over to Mrs. Deathley. Let's see what she has to say about those over there. Hello, Mrs. D.
Hello.
Got a favourite one from the first 5 tonight?
It's giving me dry mouth, that has.
Do you know, it gave me dry mouth as well, which is I'm going to lean down for the Deathly jug.
I tell you what, I like the ones that people have sent in, like, personally, because I feel like I can trust them more.
Yes.
Because a lot of the older ones, you look at them and you think, I don't know, I want to believe it, but I don't know. That tall lady freaked me out.
Well, Dave in the chat said that it was definitely confirmed as a glitch in an iPhone, which
okay.
again is I enjoy that. I like that. It's how these things gain notoriety, which I think is important.
But it reminded me of the house on Haunted Hill. Some of the imagery. I don't know if anybody's seen that. Oh,
I love that we're getting a lot of new ghost stories now. I like that horror has gone full circle, and we're almost coming back to this old-fashioned eclectic style of telling ghost stories. Not things aren't not necessarily jumping out at you and full of gore and gristle. I enjoy that, there's a slow burn to stories
When the
now.
story's more modern as well, it hits home a bit more, doesn't it?
Telling something classical in an older environment. The other way around, something classical in a modern environment. Yeah,
you find yourself in the shower thinking about.
But I know what you mean about
coming into the room while your back's turned.
I know what you mean about when you see it. I mean, these are images as well. They would hopefully, they would perhaps never have been seen other than in people's their phone screens.
Yeah.
So again, if you have any, please do send them in to us. Send them in.
We love your pics.
We do love a good photograph here. Thank you, Mrs. Deathley. We'll talk to you again in a little while. Get back in your hole. Lovely. So we are going to now pop over to our very first interview of the night. We have the two this evening. Kirsty and Chris have kindly spent some time with us and have told us a few tales. Kirsty's set in the Lyceum Theatre up in Edinburgh, and well, I'll let you listen to it and decide for yourself. And Chris is set in a house that he lived in when he was younger, which is not in any way a pleasant story. Something that Mrs. Deathley and I can actually relate to, and perhaps yourselves. And before I do this as well, if you do have any connection to anything you hear tonight, if you hear us talk about anything that strikes a resonance with you and makes you go, wait just a minute, something like that happened to me, do post them in the chat. Mrs. Deathley is keeping an eye on them. She will be copy-pasting them. We'll be doing some audience stories before the end of the night. But enough from me. I'm going to hand you over now to our first interview. In this segment of the show, I hand over the storytelling reins to a guest or two to provide a small respite from my waffling tones. Joining me first tonight is Kirsty Elam McIntyre. Good evening.
Good evening, Dorian, and thank you very much for having me on your show.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. Please, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm an actor and musician, and my first job was in York, of course, which is obviously how we met. Yeah, we did quite a few shows together.
We have indeed. Now let's jump right into it. Without further ado, the microphone is yours.
So I'm a bit of a coward when it comes to ghosts. I find ghost stories absolutely terrifying. I'm up here in Edinburgh, which, as you know, is one of the most haunted cities. I think it's in competition with York for being the most haunted city. So I've had my fair share of ghostly encounters, but obviously I'm just going to mention one this evening. Before I actually performed on stage at Lyceum in Edinburgh, I worked front of house. So my ghost story is all about a theatre ghost. Now, most good old theatres have a theatre ghost, and the Lyceum is no different. And we had the Grey Lady. Several actors had mentioned looking up from the stage and seeing her just sat in the Gods, which is no longer on sale to the public. They just see this shadowy Grey Lady sat up there just calmly watching the tech rehearsals mainly. And I hadn't encountered her until one night when I was ushering. I was in the Grand Circle. The auditorium is separated from the bar area by a corridor, a long, dark corridor. It looks quite nice and the lights are up and people are milling around. It's all very nice and plush. And there's windows, like glass windows that look through into the auditorium so you can see the audience. And there's doors, obviously you open the doors and it comes to the interval. So I was sat in the corridor waiting for the interval so I could open the doors and sell ice cream and all that. And so I just sat calmly, and then all of a sudden just the air seemed to change, and I just felt like I wasn't alone in this corridor. So I looked up because I thought that one of the other ushers was coming along, and the air, it was really strange that the air at the end of the corridor seemed to be shifting and changing, and the lights were dimmed at this point because obviously there was a show going on. But the lights, they seemed to get even darker, and I felt there was this presence just coming towards me along the corridor. And as I felt like it was a she, to say she, but it was just, I mean, whether it's because I already knew about the Grey Lady or whether it was just the feeling I had, I could just feel her coming along the corridor and the lights shifting and changing, and there was this real pressure of air. And I obviously thought, do I leave? But my instinct said, no, just sit there, just stay really still and just sit on the ground and make yourself really small. And sure enough, the air just passed by me, and I expected it to be quite cold, but actually it was just this really almost like tight pressure of warm air, and this dark shape, shadowy shape, and just pushed past me and then continued down the corridor, just going about her business. And I just sat there for a while thinking, okay, what do I do now? I really don't want to be here, but I can't really leave my position. But then I felt she wasn't there anymore. She'd gone. She just wafted past me. And in those minutes afterwards, I thought, did that actually happen? Didn't really feel the same sitting on my own in that corridor after that. I could have definitely wanted someone to be with me after that. Even though she didn't seem to be malevolent or anything, I think she just really loved the theatre. So she's a nice theatre ghost. Apparently it's the ghost of Ellen Terry, who was a very famous Victorian actress who actually performed at the Lyceum. And there's a room on the Grand Circle level that's named after her. But she's mainly seen up in the gods. So maybe I was just quite lucky to catch her in the Grand Circle.
Thank you very much indeed to Kirsty for sharing that story. Just a quick announcement there. I apologise to Kirsty if you are watching. I spelt your middle name wrong. E-L-I-A. It should have been E-I-L-A. And the horrific thing is that I spotted that about an hour ago, and I very hastily made the alteration and transferred it over to the computer I'm running this from, but then forgot to replace the video within the stream. So my ferocious apologies. You took the time to share that wonderful story with me, and then I had the audacity to spell your name wrong. I'm very sorry indeed. Now, we'll be back with a second interview in a little while from her partner, Chris, and it's not as warm and fuzzy an experience. As though that one is quite odd and a little bit creepy, ultimately ended in a reasonably pleasant fashion. The next one is not going to have a happy ending, I'm afraid to say. And I think at this point we'll go over to Mrs. Deathley to see what she has to say. Hello, Mrs. D.
Hello again.
So the Grey Lady of Edinburgh.
Well,
interesting.
There's a lot of grey ladies around, aren't there?
Particularly theatres.
Yeah, you don't find many like neon pink, hot pink ladies.
It's very true.
But the Grey Lady strikes fear in my heart. I would not want to be in a room with her. However, I find it really interesting that Kirsty said the ghost felt warm. That was unusual, because usually they're cold, aren't they?
That's the odd thing about it, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a sort of normally a coldness.
That would feel a bit more friendly. Like she's trying to give you a hug.
A little bit of a lovely thespian hug.
Lovely theatre.
Well, it's interesting. I wonder if anybody else out there lives near an old theatre that happens to be haunted by a grey lady. I mean, maybe
Other
this
than
is...
us.
We have one in York. I believe the Sherman Theatre in Cardiff, Wales, has a Grey Lady of York.
Let us know in the comments if you know.
Kirsty and I both performed there together when we were touring the country, and I was being a wizard in a play. I was playing Rincewind the Wizard from the Discworld book series.
You can see it, can't you?
I had the big. This is a tame and very small beard in comparison to the beard I grew back in the olden days. I say the olden days. It was like the late 2000s. I think I was in my mid to late 20s. Fascinating, interesting. Yes, the Grey Ladies of... Perhaps it's just a superstition that it has sort of moved around.
Yeah.
Because theatrically, it's going to be one of those stories that has travelled.
A lot of things, like, for example, when you're at school and you have like a thing that you do at school, like a joke that you play on people, and other people from other schools do it as well. And how did that happen?
That was very odd. Obviously, Mrs. Deathy and I went to school in the 90s, that old, long forgotten time ago. And this is before every child had a device in their hands. And it was always interesting to me how certain words and phrases, stupid words and phrases, would be spoken in a school 200 miles away.
Yeah, because that was before the days of everybody watching the same shows on.
Exactly. It was
Netflix
long before social media. And it's interesting, perhaps The Grey Lady is a story that has just permeated the theatrical community.
I mean, ghosts have their own names, but people just make her a Grey Lady.
Of course.
Because that's what they've heard of.
The Grey Lady of York, if you want to know more about her, join us next Sunday night for our late night after dark haunted tour of York. It's going to be a very spooky one. A lot of people have said we're enjoying the tours, but they're in the daylight, which obviously middle of summer does take something away. So we're going to do a late night. I think we're starting at 9:30. The sun will start to disappear. But that is right there. Dave, I was not, sadly. I was not. No, I was not the Rincewind at Clippers Tower. Same company, but I was preceded by a fellow named Lee Rabbits. Kirsty, however, was in that version of Eric, and I did pop along. That's where we first met. Marvellous. Anyway, we're going to move on now to the next portion of the tour. Thank you, Mrs. Deathley.
I'm going to pop off.
Pop off, and away you go. And I'm going to talk to you, friends, about a haunted item. This is a new piece, new section I've decided to add in. I've started to hunt down haunted objects that have perhaps gained notoriety of a very supernatural nature. And brace yourselves, because this is not a good one. This is a very, very, very unpleasant image indeed. Now, some of you may have heard of this entity. It is simply known as Robert the Doll. Okay, without further ado, we're going to make our way towards him. Now, we are going to begin just outside here, outside of the East Martello Museum. I mean, just looking at the outside of it, you know that nothing good is going to happen when you go inside of that building. Now, Robert is a doll. Robert is a doll who was once owned by Florida painter and author Robert Eugene Otto. Where is he? Where are you? There's Robert. There's a painting of Robert, because he was alive a fair old time ago. So not a lot of colour photography back in the olden days. So that is a painting of Robert Eugene Otto that was taken. Otto was described as eccentric at best. He belonged to a prominent Key West family. The doll, however, was reportedly manufactured by the Steiff Company. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Steiff of Germany. Purchased by Otto's grandfather while on a trip to Germany in 1904, and he was given to young Otto as a birthday gift. Now, the doll's sailor suit was likely an outfit that Otto wore himself as a child, and then one day decided to place on the doll itself. Now, the doll remained stored at the Otto family home in Key West while Otto studied art in New York and Paris. Otto married, the couple returned home, and sadly his wife passed away 2 years after Robert did. Robert passed away in 1974, his wife passing away 2 years later. But I think it's time that we meet Robert. There he is, kept inside of his enclosure. Now you can decide whether or not Robert is inside of a glass box for, well, whose safety, his or the visitors. See, in 1994, the doll was donated to the East Martello Museum, where it has now become a popular tourist attraction. I've not, Richard. No, I've sadly never been to Florida. Now, I've been to New York, but I've never been to Florida, never been to the side of the country. It is annually rotated to the old post office and the custom house in October and moves around the place. Now, according to the legend, Robert the doll has supernatural activities that allow it to move. Its facial expressions will change. There he is again, look. Other stories claim that the doll has moved voodoo figurines around the room it's stored in, and the doll is in fact aware of what goes on around it. Other legends claim that the doll vanished after Otto's house changed ownership a number of times after his death, or that young Otto triggered the doll's supernatural powers by blaming childhood mishaps on the doll. Now that's interesting, the mishaps there, because it has been said that Otto the doll is actually to blame for misfortunes. People believe he has caused car accidents, broken bones, job loss, divorce, a cornucopia of other misfortunes. And museum visitors supposedly experience post-visit misfortunes for failing to respect Robert. And you can see there that he is covered in small pockmarks. I think I have a closer photo of him. There he is. the dents and marks upon his face almost like scars with his black beady eyes, a wicked smirk sitting upon his face, as if Robert knows something we don't. Over the years, Robert has caused people to agree that Robert is terrifying and Robert is haunted. 111 years old. Mrs. Deathley is pulling a very, very, very distressed face over in the corner of the room. It's now under the charge of Corey Convertito, the curator of the museum, who says what people really remember is what they would probably term as an unhealthy relationship with the doll. Now, people have actually, as I've said, afforded misfortune to the doll and have turned up to witness him, turned up to mock him, actually. Recently, Robert the doll has become somewhat of a celebrity on social media. People would go and take selfies with Robert the doll. They would perhaps toy with him, say terrible, terrible things to him, and as such, misfortune would follow. And as a result of that, people have discovered that the only way to undo this misfortune is to pay respect to Robert the doll and indeed to apologize him. He now receives 1 to 3 letters every single day begging for forgiveness, asking for advice to hex those who have wronged him. They have now received close to 2,000 letters, which they have kept and catalogued. He sent sweets, he sent tricks, he sent all manner of wonderful gifts. People have actually left behind rolled up joints, marijuana, cigarettes, upon the little plinth in front of him, which the museum aren't particularly fond of. It's completely inappropriate, she says. We are a museum after all. Now here's the thing. Somebody actually printed a small sign which was placed at the base of Robert the doll. And it's a list of warnings, a list of things that someone said actually happened to them. He does look a bit like Pob, like a demonic Pob. Oh. Either way, Robert the doll is quite terrifying. Apologise. Oh, Mrs. Deathley had informed me that if anything went wrong with the technology side of it, she would click her fingers at me. So she then started clicking her fingers at me, and I panicked. But apparently I just have to say, I'm very sorry, Robert. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Remember, friends, always apologise to Robert the doll. And there he is. Whew. Okay, friends, we're now going to move into our second stream of images. They are lurking around here somewhere. There we are. And we're going to up the oddness a little bit now. And we're going to begin with this photograph taken in 1919. Now, this is a group portrait. And it is of Sir Victor Goddard's Royal Air Force Squadron. And it does seem to feature the face of a mechanic who died 2 days earlier. It's quite a famous photograph, this. Now, where you're looking is on the back row. 1, 2, 3, 4 gentlemen in from the left. Someone has handily blown up the image there, and you can just see the face. All the gentlemen in the photograph wearing hats. Freddie Jackson in the background, not. We have a second image here. Same photograph, but ever so slightly restored. You can see him there again. Now, the group portrait of Goddard's squadron, which had served in World War I, is said to feature the ghostly face of Freddie Jackson, a mechanic who had been accidentally killed by an airplane propeller 2 days earlier. His face is said to be visible behind the airman, the top row, 4th from the left. There he is. There he is. Image 7. This one sent in by Tess Humphrey, a churchyard in Alnwick, 2010. Now, the reason why I've included this one, even though it's not immediately obvious what's there, is if you look to the top right above the stones, there are a handful of small orbs floating around. And this is often something that people report seeing when they take photographs they believe to be of a more supernatural nature. it's normally orbs that are kind of prominent. They see small, floating balls. Mrs. Deathley trying very hard not to make a comment on this one, I can see. Floating balls, Mrs. Deathley, just floating around the place. Now, the Golden Fleece in York is perhaps one of the most notorious floaty balls pubs that exists out there, I believe. There are actually photographs on the wall. Some people believe that the photography has captured an essence or a spirit. Some people believe it simply to be a reflection of light on the dust particles captured by the camera lens. Either way, as I always say, you make up your own mind. Now, this photograph was taken in Leeds General Infirmary. This ghostly figure was seen near the children's ward at Leeds General Infirmary by hospital worker Andrew Milburn. There have been several stories, the sounds of footsteps in the corridors, but nothing has ever been caught on camera. Now, some people have actually pointed out that this is a still image from a film. I have not seen the film. If you do know the film, let me know. But what happened there, the reason I've included this one, I find it interesting that an image that is completely created has attached itself to an existing story. I find that quite fascinating. People, of course, like to lean into what they believe. And before we head into our first, I believe, truly distressing image of the night, we have one more sent in by Adam Magson. This one was taken at Eastbury Manor House 2010. Now, I'm just going to read to you directly what Adam wrote here while you see this image. I remember a few years back, one of the major newspapers, that a woman captured a ghostly image at Alton Towers, in the ruin of the towers, as it was once the former home of the 15th Earl of Shrewsbury. It is said that the towers are meant to be haunted by different ghosts from its interesting past. We did encounter haunted activity at Eastbury Manor in Barking, East London, back in 2010, when we did a haunted night there. One of the rooms, I'd managed to capture some strange red mist with a couple of orbs. However, on that night in 2010, somebody on the group that we were doing the haunted night with there lost somebody in a motorbike accident. I still question to this day if this is a capture of some sort of spirit. It does seem very odd how I'd captured this from a digital camera at the time. Very interesting indeed. Thank you for sending that in, Adam. And finally, this image, taken in 1976. This image, taken by Ed and Lorraine Warren, claims to show the ghost of a 9-year-old boy, John DeFeo. DeFeo, along with his older brother, 2 sisters and parents, were killed by his older brother, Ronald, in their house in Amityville. Now, the interesting thing here is when you have a larger version of this photograph, you can actually see a tall figure standing behind the young boy. So whether or not the young boy is the image of young John DeFeo, whether it's just a photograph that was found in the house, there is definitely something else lurking behind him. Ed and Lorraine Warren were paranormal experts who entered the house and captured this image using a camera that consistently took infrared photos during the night. Now, the DeFeo murders were the inspiration for the Amityville horror books and films. If you're aware of the Amityville horror films, there was, of course, a remake recently starring Ryan Reynolds himself, I believe, came out a few years ago. These murders were actually inspiration for the horror books and the films. How anybody would look at a house like that and say, that's for me, definitely going to live in there. Not entirely sure. Not entirely sure if that one would be for me. There you go. Our second batch of images for the night. I do apologise if you're planning on sleeping this evening. Do apologise indeed. So, friends, the time has arrived. I'm going to uncover one of my ears so I can have a little bit of a listen as to what I'm talking about. We're heading into our story now for the evening. And the story I've chosen for you tonight is a tale entitled The Red Room by H.G. Wells, him of the Time Machine fame. Yes, indeed. It's an odd one, this, because obviously Wells more known, I would say, for his The Time Machine, of course. But this is a wonderful story. I said I've read it briefly, so let's find out how it goes. But I'm a very, very big fan of this one indeed. The Red Room by H.G. Wells. I can assure you, said I, that it will take a very tangible ghost to frighten me. As I stood up before the fire with my glass in my hand. It is your own choosing, said the man with the withered arm, and glanced at me askance. 28 years, said I have lived, and never a ghost have I seen as yet. The old woman sat staring hard into the fire, her pale eyes wide open. Aye, she broke in, and 28 years you have lived and never seen the likes of this house, I reckon. There's many things to see when one's still 28. She swayed her head slowly from side to side. Many things to see and sorrow for. Now, I half suspected the old people were trying to enhance the spiritual terrors of their house by droning insistence. I put down my empty glass on the table and looked about the room, caught a glimpse of myself, abbreviated and broadened to an impossible sturdiness, in the queer old mirror in the end of the room. Well, I said, if I see anything tonight, I shall be so much the wiser, for I come to the business with an open mind. It is of your choosing, said the man with the withered arm once more. I heard the faint sound of a stick and a shambling step on the flags in the passage outside. The door creaked on its hinges. A second old man entered, more bent, more wrinkled, more aged even than the first. He supported himself by the help of a crutch. His eyes were covered by a shade, and his lower lip, half averted, hung pale and pink from decayed yellow teeth. He made straight for the armchair on the opposite side of the table, sat down clumsily and began to cough. The man with the withered hand gave the newcomer a short glance of positive dislike. The old woman took no notice of his arrival, but remained with her eyes fixed steadily on the fire. I said it's of your own choosing, said the man with the withered hand, when the coughing from the newcomer had ceased for a while. It's of my own choosing indeed, I answered. The man with the shade became aware of my presence for the first time, and threw his head back for a moment and sideways to see me. I caught a momentary glimpse of his eyes, small and bright and inflamed. Then he began to cough and splutter again. Why don't you drink, said the man with the withered arm, pushing the beer toward him. The man with the shade poured out a glassful with a shaking hand that splashed half as much again on the deal table. A monstrous shadow of him crouched upon the wall and mocked his action as he poured and drank. I must confess, I had scarcely expected these grotesque custodians. There is, to my mind, something inhuman in senility, something crouching. The human quality seemed to drop from old people insensibly day by day. The three of them made me feel uncomfortable with their gaunt silences, their bent carriage, their evident unfriendliness to me and one another. And that night, perhaps, I was in the mood for uncomfortable impressions. I resolved to get away from their vague foreshadowings of the evil thing upstairs. If, said I, you will show me to this haunted room of yours, I will make myself comfortable there. The old man with a cough jerked his head back so suddenly that it startled me, and shot another glance of his red eyes at me from out of the darkness under the shade. But no one answered me. I waited a minute, glancing from one to the other. If, I said a little louder, if you will show me to this haunted room of yours, I will relieve you from the task of entertaining me. There's a candle on the slab outside the door, said the man with the withered hand. But if you go to the Red Room tonight, you go alone. Very well, I answered shortly. And which way do I go? I listened to the descriptions. Afterwards, have I got it right, I said, as I repeated them back to him. He corrected me on one in particular. Are you really going? Said the man in the shade, looking at me again for the third time with his odd, unnatural tilting face. It is what I came for, I said, and moved towards the door. And as I did so, the old man with the shade rose and staggered round the table, so as to be closer to the others in the fire. As the door turned, I looked back at them, and I saw they were all close together, dark and twisted against the firelight, staring at me over their shoulders with an intent expression on their ancient faces. Well, good night. Good night, then, I said, setting the door open. I left the door wide until the candle was, alight, and I shut them in and walked down the chilly, echoing passage. I must confess that the oddness of these old pensioners, in whose charge their ladyship left the castle, and the deep-toned, old-fashioned furniture of the housekeeper's room in which they foregathered, had affected me curiously in spite of my effort to keep myself at a matter-of-fact phase. Now, the passage I was in, long and shadowy, with a film of moisture glistening on the wall, was as gaunt and as cold as a thing that is dead and rigid. But with an effort, I sent such thoughts to the right about. The long, draughty subterranean passage was chilly and dusty, and my candle flared, made the shadows cower and quiver. The echoes rang up and down the staircase. A shadow came sweeping unto me, and another fled before me into the darkness overhead. I came to the wide landing and stopped there for a moment, listening to a rustling that I fancied I heard creeping up behind me. Satisfied of silence, I pushed open the unwilling baize-covered door and stood in the silent corridor. The effect was scarcely what I imagined. The moonlight coming in by the great window on the grand staircase picked out everything in the vivid black shadow or reticulated silvery illumination. Everything seemed to have its proper position. The house may well have been deserted on yesterday instead of 12 months ago. There were candles in the sockets of the sconces. Whatever dust had gathered on the carpets was distributed so evenly as to be invisible by my candlelight. A waiting stillness was over everything. I was about to advance when I stopped abruptly. A bronze group stood upon the landing, hidden from me by a corner of wall, but its shadow fell with marvellous distinctness upon the white panelling, and gave me the impression of someone crouching as if to waylay me. The thing jumped upon my attention suddenly. I stood rigid for half a moment. Then, with my hand in my pocket that held the revolver, I advanced, only to discover a Ganymedean eagle glistening in the moonlight. That incident for a time restored my nerve, and a dim porcelain Chinaman on a buhl table whose head rocked as I passed scarcely startled me. Finally, the door to the Red Room stood before me. I moved my candle from side to side in order to see clearly the nature of the recess in which I stood before opening the door. I entered, closing the door behind me at once, turned the key, I found the lock within, and stood within the candle held aloft, surveying the scene of my vigil, the great Red Room of Lorraine Castle, in which it is said that the young Duke himself had died, or rather in which he had begun his dying, for he had opened the door and fallen headlong down the steps to his death that I had just ascended. That had been the end of his vigil, of his most gallant attempt to conquer the ghostly tradition of the place, and never, I thought, had better served the ends of superstition. There were other and older stories that clung to the room, back to the half-incredible beginning of it all, the tale of a timid wife and the tragic end that came to her husband's jest of a frightening bye. And looking round that huge shadowy room, with its black window bays, its recesses and alcoves, its dusty brown red hangings and dark, gigantic furniture, one could well understand the legends that had sprouted in the black corners of this germinating darkness. Attracted by a fall of a particle of dust, I leaned forward and looked up the blackness of a near chimney. Trying to preserve my scientific attitude of mind, I walked around and began tapping the oak panelling for any secret opening. But I desisted before reaching the alcove when I saw my face in a mirror. White. The fire was laid, an unexpected consideration from the old housekeeper, to keep down any disposition of shiver, and when it was burning well, I stood round with my back to it and regarded the room once more. The echoing of the stir and the crackling of the fire was no sort of comfort to me. The shadow in the alcove at the end of the room began to display this undefinable quality of presence, an odd suggestion of a lurking, living thing that comes so easily in silence and solitude. To reassure myself, I walked with a candle closer towards it, satisfied myself there was nothing tangible there. I stood that candle upon the floor of the alcove and left it in position. The sombre reds and greys of the room troubled me. Even with its 7 candles, the place was merely dim. The light in the alcove flaring in a draught, the fire flickering, keeping the shadows perpetually shifting and stirring in a noiseless, flighty dance. Casting about for a remedy, I recalled the wax candles I'd seen in the corridor, and with a slight effort, carrying a candle and leaving the door open, I walked out into the moonlight and presently returned with as many as 10 newfound treasures. These I put in various knickknacks around the room, lit and placed where the shadows had lain deepest, some on the floor, some on the window recess, some placed so close by that not an inch of the room had not the direct light in at least one of them. It occurred to me that when the ghost came, I could warn him not to trip over these candles. The room was now quite brightly illuminated. There was something very cheering and reassuring in these silent, streaming flames, and to notice the steady diminution of length offered me an occupation and gave me a reassuring sense of the passage of time. Then something happened in the alcove. I did not see the candle go out. The black shadow sprung back in its place. I took the matchbox from the table, walked across the room in a leisurely manner to relight the corner again. My first match would not light. I succeeded with the second. Something seemed to blink on the wall before me. I turned my head involuntarily and saw the 2 candles on the little table by the fireplace were now extinguished. I rose at once to my feet. I walked back. I relit one, and as it did, I saw the candle in the right sconce of one of the mirrors wink and go out, and almost immediately its companion followed it. The flames vanished as if the wick had been suddenly nipped between a finger and thumb, leaving the wick neither glowing nor smoking, but dead black. While I stood gaping, the candle at the foot of the bed went out. The shadow seemed to take another step towards me. "What is this?" I cried, with a high note getting into my voice. And at that, the candle on the corner of the wardrobe went out, the one I had relit just moments ago. My hands trembled so much that twice I missed the rough paper on the matchbox. As the mantle emerged from the darkness, 2 candles in the remoter end of the room eclipsed. But with the same match, I relit the larger mirror candles, and on those the floor nearby, so that for the moment I seemed to gain upon these extinctions. But then, in a noiseless volley, there vanished 1, 2, 3, 4 lights at once in different corners of the room, and I struck another match in quivering haste and stood hesitating where to take it. As I stood undecided, an invisible hand seemed to sweep out the 2 candles on the table, and with a cry of terror, I dashed at the alcove, into the corner, and then into the window, relighting 2 as 3, and more disappeared by the fireplace. And then, perceiving a better way, I dropped matches on the iron-bound deed-box in the corner, caught up in the bedroom candlestick. I leapt panting from candle to candle in a vain struggle against this remorseless advance, bruising myself in the thigh against a table. I stumbled and fell, whisked the cloth away from the table in my fall. The candle rolled away from me as I snatched another. Abruptly, this was blown out as I swung it off the table, by the wind of my sudden movement, and immediately the 2 remaining candles followed. There was a light still in the room, an unexplained red light that streamed across the ceiling and staved off the shadows from me. The fire! Of course, I could still thrust the candle between the bars and relight it. I turned to where the flames were still dancing between the yellowing coals and splashed red reflections upon the furniture. I made 2 steps towards the grate. The flames dwindled and vanished. Their glow deceased. The reflections rushed together and disappeared. And as I thrust the candle between the bars, darkness closed upon me like the shutting of an eye, wrapped around me in a stifling advance, sealing my vision, crushing the last vestiges of self-possession from my brain. But it was not only palpable darkness, but intolerable terror. The candle fell away from my hands. I flung out my arms in a vain effort to thrust upon the ponderous blackness. Lifting up my voice, screamed with all of my might. I may have staggered to my feet. I know that I suddenly thought of a moonlit corridor, and with my head bowed and my arms over my face, made a stumbling run for the door. But I had forgotten the exact position of where I stood. I struck myself heavily against the corner of the bed. I staggered back, turned, and was either struck or struck myself against some other unseen bulky furnishing. I have a vague memory of battering myself thus to and fro in the darkness, of a final heavy blow upon my forehead, of a horrible sensation of falling that lasted for an age, and then I remember no more. I opened my eyes in daylight. My head was roughly bandaged. The man with the withered hand was watching my face. He looked about me, trying to remember what had happened, and for a space I could not recollect. I rolled my eyes into the corner of the room and saw the old woman, no longer abstracted, no longer terrible, pouring out some drops of medicine into a small blue glass. They told me then, and I heard of the haunted red room as one who hears the tale. "We found you at dawn," said the man with the withered hand. "There was blood on your forehead and lips." I wondered that I'd ever disliked them. The 3 of them now in daylight seemed commonplace old folk more than enough. The man with the green shade has his head bent as one who sleeps. As very slowly I recovered the memory of the experience. "You believe now," said the old man with the withered hand, "that the room is haunted?" He spoke no longer as one who greets an intruder, but as one who consoles an old friend. "Yes," said I, "the room is haunted." "Tell us truly," he spoke. "Is it the old Earl who—" "No," I interrupted. "It is not." "I told you so," said the old lady with the glass in her hand. "It's his poor young countess who was frightened." "It is not," I cut short again. "There is neither ghost of Earl nor ghost of countess in that room. There is no ghost there at all, but worse, far worse, something impalpable. The worst of all things that haunt mortal men. And that is in all of its nakedness fear. Fear that will not have light nor sound, that will not bear with reason, that deafens and darkens and overwhelms. It followed me through the corridor. It fought with me in the room." I stopped abruptly. An interval in the silence. My hands went up to my bandages. The candles went out one after the other, and I fled. Finally, the man with the shade lifted his face sideways to see me and spoke. "That is it," said he. "I knew that it was. A power of darkness, to put such a curse upon a home. It lurks there, always. You can feel it even in the daytime, even on a bright summer's day, in the hangings and the curtains, keeping behind you however you face about. In the dusk it creeps in the corridors and follows you, so that you dare not turn. It is even as you say, fear itself manifested within that room. The red room with black fear. And there it will be. There it will be for as long as this house of sin endures." Ooh, thank you, H.G. Wells. Thank you very much indeed. Well, there you go, friends. I genuinely hope you enjoyed that one. Look down in the background. I love their Dawn Debenham just noticing in the background of this moment of high tension and drama, and there is indeed a Marmite tin lurking behind me. That most terrifying of sandwich fillings. Well, there you go, folks. I do hope you enjoyed that one. Lovely stuff. So we're going to head now into our second interview for the night. I'm going to rest my voice for a little while because I go a bit gravelly when I'm telling ghostly stories. I get a bit down in here. I'm like, oh, it's a little bit frightening. It's a little bit terrifying of what's going on. Something smells, or I think Mrs. Deathy might have farted over in the corner from fear. She's looking guilty, but I think we know the truth. But here you are, folks. This is the second and final interview for the night. I present to you for your hearing ears, Mr. It is time for our second ghostly encounter of the night, and this is not one for the faint of heart. Without further ado, I hand the microphone to Chris Mundy. Good evening.
Hi Dorian, it's Chris here. I currently live in Edinburgh with my lovely girlfriend. Usually I work backstage in theatre, but obviously that's not an option at the moment as everything's closed. It just means that I can focus a bit more on my business, Rekindled Pyrography. If you're not sure what pyrography means, it just means that I get to burn things for fun, in an artistic way, of course. As you can tell, I've not lived up in Scotland my whole life. I did spend a lot of time growing up in a lovely place in West Yorkshire called Huddersfield. So it wasn't long since moving to Upper Denby in Huddersfield that we heard from the neighbours that the house was haunted. You know, when you hear that kind of thing, you take it with a pinch of salt. Me being a 12-year-old boy, I didn't really want to admit that I was a believer, let alone scared of ghosts. You know, after being told that, there were a couple of occurrences that made me a bit more agnostic, shall I say. So I'd say it was within the first year or two of living there, and as a family we'd already experienced a lot of strange things happening, and it wasn't until later on that I'd had one or two quite scary experiences, both involving being in bed, asleep in fact initially. The room itself was quite big. I had a bed quite near a window, I used to have a set of blue curtains, but there would always be a street light shining through the window. So it wasn't completely dark. There was enough light there to cast some shadows. I remember waking up one night and feeling a heavy presence at the end of the bed, as if someone was there standing over me. And I tried to move, and I couldn't move. I felt like there was a pressure washed over my entire body, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move a muscle at all. And I tried shouting, I tried screaming, and all that could come out was air. I couldn't make a sound, but all the while I could sense this presence at the end of the bed. I couldn't look properly, but I could see a shadow. I could also feel something gripping my feet. It wasn't necessarily hands, but I could feel some sort of pressure on my feet, holding my feet and my ankles to the bed. It took quite a long time for me to be able to coax myself out of this and enable myself to move again and be in a position where I could look around, I could look out the window and just check that there was nothing there. But as soon as I could, I noticed that there just wasn't anything there. There was no one to be seen. Like I say, this wasn't the only time. This did happen to me again with a slight variation. It was the same scenario in the same bedroom, but this time the presence was sat at the end of the bed by my feet. I still couldn't move, I still couldn't shout or scream. I could just feel the mattress pressed down as this person, this presence, sat down at the end of my bed. I still couldn't to this day tell you whether that presence was evil or good, but I just got the feeling that it was an elderly person, perhaps an elderly lady, and that's just from a feeling that I had. So they were the only two experiences that I had in that house that happened directly to me. And I kind of hope it doesn't happen again. It's not a pleasant experience not being able to move.
Thank you very much to Chris for sharing that tale with us. Just want to very quickly, before we discuss Chris's experience, that Mrs. Deathley did not fart. It was a ghost fart that has been blamed. So here we go. So Mrs. Deathley, here we go. So we can talk about this one, can't we, Mrs. D? Sleep paralysis, which Jin has just mentioned there. And this is something that Mrs. Deathley and I have both experienced in our lives. Just once for me, thankfully.
Yeah, just once for me as well, actually.
But you share your experience first.
Well, it was when I was in my... I'm going to turn you down in my ear there. When I first started at university in York St John, that's your dad. And I used to live in the city residence, which used to be, I believe, part of the old York Hospital or the nurses' accommodation. And in my first week at university, I woke up in the night and felt like there was somebody sitting on my legs, and I could see like a dark shadow at the end of the bed. I mean, whether or not I just imagined that, but I did feel like it was a woman and that she didn't want me to get up out of bed, and I couldn't make any noises or say anything or do anything. And I tell you what, the next morning I rang my mum and I said to her, I woke up in the night and someone was sat on my legs. I think it was a ghost. And she said to me, have you told the student liaison?
That's amazing. It's the best response ever. It was in the late, maybe 2008, 9. and it was when I was living around the Groves area, which is not far from where you just said that you were. And it was a shared house with some visiting students. It wasn't a very big house, but the interesting thing was that when you came through the front door, there was a second door that took you to the left into the living room, and then there was another door in front of you that went straight into a staircase. So you could literally go through the front door, through the secondary door, up the stairs, through the door, and you're in my room. And it was a very old house. You know, the doors weren't particularly robust.
Clown housey around there.
They are a bit oddly made, yeah. And I had this weird mixture of sleep paralysis and a waking nightmare where I was in bed, I was asleep, and I heard the door, as if the door had been kicked open downstairs. This almighty crash, and then I heard the sound of like a dozen people heavily running up the stairs. That kind of sound of like, you know, large people, a dozen or so. My bedroom door burst open, and then they grabbed the duvet and they pulled it down. So I was basically pinned by this duvet, and then they all started screaming at me, like the loudest, most animalistic scream ever. And it went on for like 2 minutes. And I remember just being stuck there, and I didn't know what to do. And like you say, I couldn't move. I couldn't really breathe properly. I was just terrified. And then suddenly I was up, and like the duvet was around me, and I was thrashing around trying to fight. So I had this, it was a nightmare. It was a terrible nightmare mixed in with this bizarre sensation of sleep paralysis. And if you've ever had it, if you've ever experienced sleep paralysis, it's so unnerving. Mm-hmm. Because it's like you wake up and you have no connection to your body. Your brain, your mind is completely coherent, yet your body will not do what you ask it to. No. On that note, we've got a few audience stories to share. A few people have shared some instances in the comments. I'll let you take the lead on this one, and then I've got one from a good friend of ours, Rob, who sent us over a couple of stories that I'll read out afterwards. So take it away, Mrs. D.
Okay, so I've just copied and pasted a couple of things that people have said in the comments. Knock Once for Yes, who are a podcast which Dorian featured on recently.
Go check them out. I was on their last episode, and it's a fantastic podcast.
They're still in the little viewers there. So they said we should check out the Woodford Church ghost photo.
Okay.
We'll try and get that for next time. It's just around the corner from them, and they had a go at replicating it, I imagine, to see if it was real, but they had no success. So that I really want to know more about that.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit them up after this, and we'll have a chat about that. I think
we had Stuart Pilkington.
Hello, Stuart.
Yeah, he said, I was always told the story that my grandma bought her house for a snip in the 1940s because the former owner said it was haunted with a ghostly coach driving past the house at night. Then in the 1960s, they dug up a skeleton in the garden from some sort of medieval graveyard. The neighbour kept it in the cellar, and I remember seeing it when I was very young. It was a really creepy house. That sounds like something from a film.
I don't like that as well.
Really unnerving.
Not a fan.
And top fan, Flash Clark, loving those top fans.
Top fan badges.
Said, have you heard of the haunted chair in the museum in Thirsk? Legend has it, if you sat on it, you'd die. And the museum have now hung it on the wall to stop people from sitting on it.
There's a cursed chair in the Black Swan pub in York.
Is there?
Yeah, there's a chair that sits by the fire in the back bar, and it's said that no one's allowed. You know, that it's urged that if you do see it empty and the pub is full, just remain standing.
Oh yeah, actually,
and if they move it, bad things happen when they move it. That's any more?
No, that's it for
okay.
now.
I'll give you Rob's. So this is Rob Coots. He got in touch, and he really wanted to share the stories, but he didn't want to appear on camera or talk, so he's typed them up for me, and I'm just going to read them as he wrote them because I love the way he's written these. He's written them with like a childlike glee. So here we go. It is Christmas Day, and I'm about 10 years old. I've just got one of those laser tag sets with the chest plate and the cool space guns, and of course everything needs an obscene amount of batteries. So I set off on a mission to locate and install said batteries. My intel suggests they are in the kitchen, so off I go. My mum has got one of these new CDs playing in a new CD player, the little fat round ones. I really just want the little fat chippy with a handle on so you could carry it around the house. Brilliant. I pay it no mind because I'm powering up my lasers. Several minutes pass and I'm all set up, but now I start paying attention to my surroundings and I realise that I don't recognise the music that's playing. The words are all wrong. The music sounds warped. I call to my mum, "What are you listening to?" She replies, "I'm listening to the Beatles. Why?" "It sounds funny," I said. So she comes in to see what I'm talking about, and we realise that it is playing backwards, which, as far as I'm aware, is not something that a CD is able to do. Now, while this is odd, it must be said that the CD player in question belonged to my granddad, who passed away the year before, and we like to think that he was just popping in to say Merry Christmas in a rather odd way. And secondly, I was about 19 years old, and my youngest brother was merely months old. He had just begun to sleep in a cot on his own when this instance occurred. My mum had just got him down to sleep. She got herself into bed and was settling down when, clear as day, she heard a woman's voice over the baby monitor say, "Hello, little baby, what's your name?" She shot out of bed into the other room to find that my brother was wide awake, quiet and clearly alone. So she snatched him up, took him into a room, and after some thought, she came to the conclusion that the woman's voice she heard must have been her mother's, as Jack was the only grandchild she'd met before she passed away, and she was also just popping in to visit. I love that. I love that grandparents come back afterwards just to make sure everything's okay. Yeah. Very, very odd. Very, very odd. Thanks, Rob, for sending those in. So, folks, we're going to head into our final set of stories tonight. Just a couple of things before we do. Firstly, of course, this has been free to watch. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves. If you do feel like a wave of generosity, Mrs. Deathley will post in the paypal.me link anything you fancy sending over. Greatly, greatly appreciated. It is genuinely helping us remain alive at these times. Hopefully, the Ghost Bus will be returning before Halloween, and I am trying to figure out what I can do day to day until that happens. But yeah, hopefully this is entertaining for you and having a wonderful time. But here we go, the final set of haunted images tonight, ending with my favorite ones. So to begin with, we have this image taken in 1978. This was a photograph taken in a Toys R Us store in Sunnyvale, not Sunnydale, Buffy fans, in California, and is allegedly haunted by the ghost of Johnny Johnson. This image shows a silhouette leaning up against the shelves. That same figure was not there when the photograph was taken. The story goes that Johnny had a thing for a girl named Elizabeth, the daughter of a plantation owner. The plantation used to be on the Toys R Us site, and Johnny tragically bled to death after cutting himself while chopping wood, and he now roams the aisles of the Toys R Us store, searching for her, searching for his long-lost love. Moving on. This image was taken in 2006. Waverly Hills Sanatorium. This image was snapped in an abandoned tuberculosis hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, 2006. And you can imagine in its heyday, the hospital saw an incredible amount of sickness and death, leading many to believe in the possibility that it could indeed be haunted. In recent years, it has become one of America's most popular destinations for ghost hunters. Now, this image that we're seeing here, with the figure coming out of the doorway, is said to depict Mary Lee, a ghost who tragically hung herself in the hospital. The story goes that this poor woman was impregnated by a doctor who worked in the hospital, but later wanted nothing to do with her. And this is a time, of course, where unfortunately, that would mean very, very hard times indeed. She said to roam the corridors to this very day. Same image here, but twice, once zoomed in. This is an image that has been nicknamed the Nursing Home Reaper. This photograph was taken by a resident of the nursing home that my mother works in. Not mine. I'm reading a quote here. I should have maybe specified that before we started reading it out. My mum took this photograph, I say, with absolutely no stress in my voice. Now, this photo was taken by a resident. Prior to the photo being taken, members of the staff and other residents heard the sounds of doors opening and closing, along with the appearance of a call light turning on and off, yet nobody was in the room. From what I've been told, this picture has been taken roughly 15 minutes after a patient in the facility had passed on. Some people believe it is the spirit of that person leaving the body. Some people believe it is, in fact, the Reaper himself. And now finally, my friends, we're going to head into a series of images. These are absolutely my favorite images that I've ever seen of the supernatural because they just cannot be explained. They're very bizarre. If you have an explanation for them, let me know. Let me know. I'm genuinely up for conversations about this sort of stuff. Now, Laura and I, Mrs. Deathley and I should say, do apologise, Mrs. Deathley. She and I were introduced to this string of images last year when we had the great fortune to enjoy a production of ghost stories at the York Opera House. And this image is used in the stage play. Now, this photo was taken in 1972, and at first glance, it looks absolutely normal. It's 4 friends posing for a photo at a wedding. But what I want you to do, my friends, is take a look to the man on the right, with the black trousers on. Now, you'll notice that there's something just there, just poking out between his legs. Maybe we'll just go in a little bit closer, shall we? We'll just pop in a little bit closer. Look at that. It's the bottom of a trouser leg and a shoe. Now, just to jump back out again, let's just go back out to that first image. You can see clearly there is nobody stood behind this man. But there is the trouser leg, and there is the shoe. And in case you couldn't quite make it out the first time, here it is again, this time circled. And what's that just there? Just peeking out from behind the trouser leg, from the side of the hand. That couldn't possibly be. Why, that couldn't possibly be a man's face. Absolutely bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. My favourite string of images. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are ever in the vicinity of a production of ghost stories, I urge you to go see it. I'm having a little bit of a think at the moment. I'd like to produce something within the Dorian Deathley universe that perhaps echoes the wonderfulness of those stories, of these images. There they are, 1974, a photo entitled The Extra Wedding Guest. There he is. I don't like that at all. I genuinely don't like that at all. If you didn't like that, make yourself feel warm and fuzzier by kicking in a few quid to the PayPal account. Oh my goodness me. Whew. I do get what you're saying, Dawn. The skeptic, I can be quite skeptic. I'm very, very rational and sensible, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. When I look at it, it's almost like how, because look at where the leg is and look at where the head is. Like I almost want to draw the shape. The man would have to be, his leg is straight, but his head is down there, and it's clearly not. I see a few people think a small child. That is definitely not the face of a small child. You can see the bag under the eyes, the thick eyebrow receding. I don't know. I'm definitely open to explorations of what it is, but it's genuine. The reaction from you is all great. The reaction is all great. And in a way, maybe you're trying desperately to explain to yourselves what it might be because you feel so uncomfortable about it. Sometimes when you see something that can't quite be explained, you start to pull these things apart a bit. Maybe it is a small child. Maybe it's a man doing some kind of weird contortionist act to get himself into the position that he needs to be in. But who knows? But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that has been us. Mrs. Deathley is returning. Hello, Mrs. Deathley. Here she comes.
Oh, I'm traumatized.
I am traumatized.
I am traumatized, Dorian.
Do you remember the reaction that got in the theatre when that string of images popped up?
Yes, because I did it again just
wonderful.
now.
It's so wonderful. It's very mischievous.
I can't look in that eye.
Nobody wants to look in that eye.
Oh, it makes me feel all kinds of wrong.
It is one freaky eye, says Andy Smith.
I just can't.
Is it as bad as the upside down chap at the table from the first episode?
Actually, this just made me shiver more, but that upside down chap from last week, whenever it was, that
it
no
does.
thanks.
You're right, Holly. It makes me feel uncomfortable as well. I see it, and I'm like, it makes me. I don't know. There's something about it that makes me feel
like you shouldn't be looking at it.
Yes, exactly. You shouldn't be looking at it. You shouldn't.
I feel like he sees me.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, Robert.
The shape of the way he stood. Sorry, Robert. Well, friends, I hope you've enjoyed yourself tonight. That was chapter 2 of Tales from the Fireplace. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. We will, no doubt, we'll see how they go. P.S. Get the PayPal link on the screen, maybe bottom right. Well, there's an image coming up. Oh, okay. I see what you said there. Okay, that's good maths. Good businessman there, posting out wonderful things. Yes, we'll be back next Sunday with a late night after dark tour of Haunted York. The event is live. I think it's like 1,700 people are now interested in that one, which means it's the most popular one that we've launched so far. Absolutely wonderful to see. Thank you very much for supporting these little things and staying with us. Again, if you've got any stories you'd like to share with us, if you've got any instances, anything that's happened, if you've got any photographs you'd like us to use in the show, please do send them all over to us. We might be a little bit slow to respond to direct messages to the page now and again because we're constantly sort of doing things like this, mate. You know, there's a lot of reading and scribing and planning and plotting that goes into all of these things to make them happen. And also, if you know of any lovely ghost stories, you'd like us to share, please do share them with us.
Lovely ghost stories.
Short but spooky stories are actually quite tricky to find, aren't they? Yeah. So with that final thing, one final time, if you have enjoyed yourself tonight, paypal.me/Dorian Deathly. Every little helps. It all adds up, and it will make this bizarre and peculiar time fly by. Say good night, Mrs. Deathly.
Good night, Mrs. Deathly.
Every week.